They threw a party, an actual party, with balloons and a sheet cake from the grocery store bakery that said "Freedom at Last" in blue frosting across the top. My mother-in-law Donna posted the photos on Facebook for everyone to see. There she was, grinning in the center of the frame, holding a champagne glass in one hand and a spatula in the other, surrounded by my husband's 3 brothers, their wives, 2 cousins, and an uncle who I'm fairly certain didn't even know my name. They were celebrating because I was finally gone. Because after 11 years of marriage to their golden boy, Kevin Harris, I had signed the papers and walked out of their family forever, and apparently that deserved confetti. I found out about the party the way you find out about most things that were designed to humiliate you. Someone screenshot it and sent it to my best friend, who called me at 11 at night, furious and heartbroken on my behalf, asking if I'd seen it. I hadn't. I pulled up the photos in bed, alone in a studio apartment that smelled like fresh paint and someone else's cigarette smoke leaking through the vents, and I looked at every single image. Donna cutting the cake, Kevin's brother Marcus raising a toast, Kevin himself, sitting in a lawn chair in his mother's backyard, smiling the way a man smiles when he's been told his whole life that he's the victim and he's finally started to believe it. I put my phone down and stared at the ceiling and waited for the tears. They didn't come. Not because I was strong, because I was empty. There's a difference between strength and emptiness that most people don't understand until they've lived it. Strength is choosing to stand up. Emptiness is when the thing that used to knock you down just passes through you like wind through a screen door. You feel it. You just don't fall anymore. Where are you watching from today? Tell me in the comments. And if you've ever been the person a family was happy to get rid of, keep listening. Because 6 months after that party, the same people who toasted my disappearance were standing on my doorstep asking me to come back. And the answer I gave them is something I wish I'd learned how to say a long time ago. Let me tell you about the Harris family, because understanding them is the only way this story makes sense. Kevin was the youngest of 4 boys. His mother Donna raised them mostly alone after their father left when Kevin was 6, and she did a remarkable job in many ways but a terrible job in one critical way. She taught every single one of her sons that they were perfect, not good, not capable, perfect, incapable of fault. Any problem in their lives was someone else's doing, and any woman who entered the family was, by definition, a guest in the kingdom Donna had built with her bare hands, and guests were expected to be grateful. I met Kevin when I was 23. He was 25 and working as a project coordinator for a small construction firm. Handsome in a rough kind of way, the sort of man who looked good in work boots and a flannel shirt, who opened doors for you and called you darling and made you feel like you were the only person in the room. That feeling lasted about 18 months, just long enough for me to fall in love, get married, and move into the orbit of his family, where I learned very quickly that being Kevin's wife meant being Donna's subordinate. The rules were unspoken but absolute. Donna's Sunday dinner was mandatory. Donna's opinion on how I kept my house was not a suggestion. Donna's preferences regarding my hair, my cooking, my parenting, and my general existence were to be received as guidance from a higher authority, and any resistance was met with the most devastating weapon in her arsenal: silence. Not yelling, not confrontation, just a cold, surgical withdrawal of affection that would spread through the family like ice over a pond until Kevin came home tight-jawed and distant and told me that I needed to apologize to his mother for whatever imagined offense I'd committed that week. I want to be careful here, because I know what this sounds like. It sounds like a woman complaining about her mother-in-law. And every family has that story. But this was different. This was systematic. This was a family that functioned like a closed economy. And I was the imported labor that kept the whole thing running while being told constantly that I was lucky to be included. Here's what I mean. Within 2 years of marrying Kevin, I had become the family's unofficial everything. I organized Donna's medical appointments because none of her sons would do it. I managed the books for Marcus's landscaping business because he couldn't tell the difference between revenue and profit. I helped Kevin's brother Thomas study for his contractor's license because he'd failed it twice and was too proud to hire a tutor. I watched the kids, all 7 of them across the 4 brothers, every single time there was a birthday party or a holiday or a random Saturday when someone wanted a free afternoon. I cooked for Donna when she had her hip replaced. I drove her to physical therapy 3 times a week for months. I planned every family gathering, bought every birthday present, wrote every thank you card, and mediated every argument between brothers who loved each other but had never learned how to communicate like adults because their mother had never required it. I did all of this while working full-time as an office manager for an accounting firm. I did all of this while raising my daughter, Lily, mostly alone because Kevin worked long hours and came home tired and expected the house to be quiet and dinner to be ready and his wife to be pleasant regardless of what kind of day she'd had. I did all of this while being told, regularly and casually, that I wasn't quite good enough, that my cooking wasn't as good as Donna's, that my parenting was too soft, that I was lucky Kevin put up with me because plenty of women would love to be in my position. Plenty of women would love to be in my position. Donna said that to me once, over coffee, in her kitchen, while I was folding her laundry. She said it the way you'd comment on the weather, casually, without cruelty. Just a statement of fact delivered by a woman who had decided long before she ever met me that no one would ever be good enough for her youngest son, and that whoever tried would spend the rest of her life being reminded of the gap between what she was and what she should have been. The marriage ended the way these things usually end. Not with a single explosion, but with a long, slow leak that drained everything out until there was nothing left to hold together. Kevin didn't cheat, to his credit. He just stopped trying. He stopped talking to me about anything that mattered. He stopped touching me with intention. He stopped seeing me as a person and started seeing me as a function, a system that ran his household and raised his child and managed his family and existed in the background of his life like furniture he'd stopped noticing. When I told him I wanted a divorce, he looked at me the way you'd look at an appliance that had suddenly started talking, confused, mildly annoyed, like I was malfunctioning. "You want to divorce me?" He actually laughed. "And go where? Do what?" "Diana, my mother is going to lose her mind." That was his first concern. Not our daughter, not our marriage, not even himself. His mother, Donna, was going to lose her mind. And he was right about that. She lost her mind in the form of a party with a sheet cake and blue frosting and champagne toast to my departure. The divorce itself was unremarkable. We split things fairly. Kevin kept the house because it was closer to his work and I didn't want to live in a building that felt like a museum of my own unhappiness. I got my share of savings, my car, and joint custody of Lily. I moved into the studio apartment that smelled like paint and secondhand smoke, and I started the strange, disorienting process of learning who I was without the Harris family telling me. That first month was brutal. I won't romanticize it. I cried in the shower so Lily wouldn't hear me during her visits. I ate cereal for dinner because cooking a real meal for one person felt like an act of performance art. I sat in my car in the parking lot of my office building some mornings and just breathed, trying to remember what it felt like to exist without someone else's expectations wrapped around my chest like a belt cinched one notch too tight. But here's what nobody tells you about the first month after leaving a life that was slowly suffocating you. It's horrible and it's liberating at the same time. They coexist. The grief and the relief sit right next to each other like strangers on a bus. And you don't have to choose between them. You just ride. By the second month, something shifted. I started a routine. Work, gym, home. Simple, boring, mine. I took a Saturday painting class at the community center because I'd always wanted to try watercolors, and Kevin had once told me that art was a waste of time for people who weren't talented. I wasn't talented. My first painting looked like a landscape had been in a car accident, but I loved every single brushstroke because no one was standing behind me telling me I was doing it wrong. By the third month, I made a decision that changed everything. I decided to get my real estate license, not because I had some grand plan, but because my job at the accounting firm had taught me to read financial statements. And every statement I'd ever read told the same story. People who owned property built wealth. People who didn't worked for people who did. I was tired of working for other people's futures. I wanted to build my own. I studied at night after Lily went to bed. I studied on lunch breaks. I studied in waiting rooms and grocery store parking lots and the bathtub with my phone propped against the faucet and a highlighter between my teeth. I passed the exam on my first try, and when I saw the word passed on the screen, I sat in the testing center and let myself feel something I hadn't felt in years. Pride. Uncomplicated, unshared, entirely self-generated pride. Meanwhile, across town, the Harris family was discovering something they hadn't anticipated. They were falling apart. I didn't know this at first. I'd gone no contact with everyone except Kevin, and our conversations were limited to logistics about Lily's schedule. But information has a way of finding you whether you want it or not. And in a town this size, someone always knows someone who knows someone. The first crack appeared with Marcus's business. Within 2 months of my departure, his landscaping company was in chaos. Invoices weren't going out, payments weren't being tracked, clients were calling and nobody was following up. Marcus had never done any of the administrative work himself because I had been doing it for free for 8 years. He didn't even know what software I used. He'd never asked. When he finally hired a bookkeeper, she took one look at the mess and charged him $3,000 just to untangle the backlog, and then she quit because Marcus yelled at her for asking too many questions. Donna's sons had inherited her conviction that pointing out problems was a personal attack, which makes hiring competent help somewhat difficult. The second crack was Thomas. He'd been building his contracting business on referrals, and many of those referrals had come from connections I'd made through my job at the accounting firm. I'd spent years casually mentioning Thomas to clients who needed renovation work, handing out his business cards at community events, and following up with people to make sure they'd called him. When I stopped, the referrals dried up like a creek bed in August. Thomas didn't understand why his phone stopped ringing because he'd never understood where the calls were coming from in the first place. The third crack was Donna herself. She'd had a second surgery, this time on her knee, and suddenly there was no one to coordinate her recovery. No one to schedule the follow-up appointments and drive her to physical therapy and stock her refrigerator with the specific brand of yogurt she liked and make sure she did her exercises and pick up her prescriptions and sit with her on the hard afternoons when the pain made her cry and she needed someone to hold her hand and tell her it would be okay. Her sons loved her. They would have taken a bullet for her. But none of them knew which pharmacy she used, what medications she was allergic to, or how to make the soup she ate when she was feeling low. They'd never needed to know because I had always known for them. Kevin was the fourth crack, and in some ways the worst. Without me managing the household, his life slid into a quiet, domestic entropy. Bills went unpaid. The yard went wild. Lily came home from visits with her hair unbrushed and her homework undone and once, memorably, wearing 2 different shoes because Kevin hadn't been paying attention when she got dressed. He wasn't neglectful on purpose. He just didn't have the skills. He'd never developed them because he'd married a woman who handled everything and then surrounded himself with a family that told him that was exactly how it should be. I heard all of this in fragments. A comment from a mutual friend. A frustrated text from Kevin about a water bill he'd forgotten. Lily mentioning that Grandma Donna was sad and that Uncle Marcus's truck had a sign on it that was spelled wrong because the new person he hired didn't proofread. Each fragment was a small, quiet confirmation of something I'd always suspected but never been allowed to say out loud. I was not a guest in the Harris family. I was the foundation. And foundations don't get celebrated. They get stood on, walked over, and completely forgotten until someone removes them and the whole building starts to tilt. The first call came 5 months after the divorce. It was Kevin's brother Thomas, a man who had spoken maybe 100 words to me in 11 years, most of them requests for favors delivered in the tone of someone ordering at a drive-through window. He called me on a Wednesday evening while I was reviewing listings for a client. Diana, hey, it's Thomas. His voice had that artificial casualness people use when they want something but don't want you to know they want it. How've you been? I'm doing well, Thomas. What can I help you with? A long pause. So, Marcus is having some trouble with the business stuff, the paperwork and invoicing and all that. And I was wondering if maybe you could, come by sometime and help him get organized, just for a couple hours. I let the silence sit there for a moment, long enough for him to hear it. Thomas, I have a real estate license now. My hourly consulting rate is $75. Would Marcus like to hire me professionally? The silence on his end was even longer than mine. We were thinking more like a favor. Like you used to do. I used to do a lot of things, Thomas, and nobody thought they were worth paying for. That's actually why I stopped doing them. He mumbled something about talking to Marcus and hung up. I went back to my listings and felt nothing. Not satisfaction, not resentment, just the clean, neutral feeling of a boundary held firmly in place. The second call came 2 weeks later. This time it was Donna, And that surprised me because Donna had never called me directly in 11 years. She'd always communicated through Kevin, like a queen dispatching messages through a courier. Her voice was different than I remembered, smaller, less certain. The kind of voice you hear from someone who's been alone with their thoughts long enough to start questioning some of them. Diana, I know we haven't spoken, and I know things ended badly. She paused, and I could hear her breathing, labored from the knee surgery. But I'm having a hard time right now, and the boys are trying, but they don't know how to help. The way you always did. I sat with that sentence for a moment. The way you always did. Not a compliment, not an acknowledgement, just a fact stated in the same tone she used to tell me the kitchen needed mopping. Even now, even asking for help, she couldn't bring herself to say thank you for a decade of invisible labor. She could only state that it had existed and that its absence was inconvenient. Donna, I'm sorry you're going through a difficult recovery. I can recommend some excellent home care services in the area. Would you like me to send you a list? I don't want a service, Diana. I want family. And there it was. The word she'd spent 11 years making sure I never quite felt included in. Family. Suddenly I was family. Suddenly the guest was essential. Suddenly the woman they'd toasted getting rid of was the only person who knew how to keep the machine running. Donna, I said gently, I haven't been family for 6 months. You threw a party to make sure everyone knew that. The silence that followed was the loudest thing I'd ever heard from Donna Harris. She hung up without saying goodbye. The third call was Kevin, and he didn't call. He showed up on a Saturday morning, unannounced, standing on the front step of the small house I'd recently rented with the commission from my first 3 sales. He looked tired, not dramatically destroyed, not the cinematic version of a broken man, just tired in the way that people look when they've been doing everything wrong for months and are only just starting to realize it. Can we talk? He had his hands in his jacket pockets and his shoulders were hunched against the cold. I let him in because Lily was at a friend's house and because despite everything, I believe in hearing people out. Not for their sake, for my own. Because the version of me who would have slammed the door was the same version who would have stayed married out of spite. And I was trying very hard not to be motivated by anger anymore. Anger is useful as a spark. It's terrible as a fuel source. Burns to hot, runs out to fast, leaves you empty. Kevin sat on my couch and looked around the living room. It was small but clean and decorated the way I'd always wanted to decorate. Simple, warm, books on shelves and plants on windowsills and a watercolor painting I'd done myself hanging above the fireplace. The landscape that looked like a car accident, which I loved precisely because it was terrible in mine. You seem different, he said. I am different. He nodded slowly. Diana, I messed up. I know. No. I mean, I really messed up. Not just the marriage, everything. The way I let my mom treat you. The way I never stood up for you. The way I let you do everything for everyone and never once said thank you. I watched his face carefully, looking for the performance, looking for the rehearsed delivery, the strategic vulnerability designed to reel me back in. But his eyes were red and his hands were shaking and he wasn't looking at me with expectation. He was looking at me like someone confessing something he knew couldn't be forgiven but needed to say anyway. Mom's struggling, he continued. Marcus almost lost his business. Thomas hasn't had a new client in months. And me? I can't even keep Lily's school schedule straight. Everything that used to work in our family doesn't work anymore and it took me 6 months to understand why. It was you. It was always you. You were the reason everything functioned and we treated you like you were nothing. I let him finish. I let the words land and settle like dust after a demolition. And then I said something that I'd been practicing in my head for weeks, not because I'd anticipated this exact conversation, but because I'd anticipated the feeling of being asked to go back. I always knew it would come. The only question was whether I'd be ready. Kevin, I appreciate you saying that. I really do. And I believe you mean it. But I need you to understand something. You're not here because you miss me. You're here because your life got harder when I left. Those are not the same thing. His face crumpled slightly. That's not fair. It is completely fair. When I was your wife, what did you love about me? Not what did I do for you. What did you love about me as a person? He opened his mouth, then closed it, then opened it again. The silence lasted about 10 seconds, but it felt like 10 years. That's what I thought, I said, not cruelly, just clearly. You didn't know me, Kevin. You knew what I provided. You knew the function I served, but you never knew who I was, what I cared about, what I dreamed about, what I was afraid of. In 11 years, You never asked me what my favorite book was. You don't know that I wanted to be a painter when I was young. You didn't know I was studying for my real estate exam because you never noticed the textbooks on the kitchen table. I was invisible to you, not because you're a bad person, but because you were raised to believe that love and service are the same thing, and they're not. He was crying now, quietly, not the dramatic sobbing you see in movies, just tears sliding down the face of a man who was hearing the truth and didn't know what to do with it. So what do I do? He asked. You learn. You learn how to take care of yourself and your daughter and your family without relying on someone else to do it for you. You learn how to see people instead of using them. And maybe, a long time from now, you learn how to love someone by actually knowing who they are, and us. There is no us, Kevin. Not the way there was, but there's Lily. And for her sake, I want us to be good to each other. Kind, respectful. The kind of parents she can look at and believe that people can treat each other with dignity, even after things fall apart. He left 20 minutes later. I closed the door behind him and stood in my living room and breathed. My terrible watercolor painting looked down at me from the wall, and I swear it looked better than it had the day before. Maybe that's what happens when you finally say the thing you've been carrying. Everything around you gets a little lighter. 2 months later, Donna sent me a letter. Not a text, not a phone call. An actual handwritten letter on stationery with flowers on the border. It was short. It said she was sorry. It said she hadn't understood what she'd had until it was gone. It said she'd been wrong about me and she hoped that someday I could forgive her. It said she'd taken the Facebook photos down. It was the first time in 11 years that Donna Harris had communicated with me without telling me what to do, what to fix, or what I was doing wrong. And I sat with that letter for a long time, turning it over in my hands, reading it 3 times, letting myself feel the complicated mess of emotions that comes with receiving an apology you waited years for and no longer need. I wrote her back. I told her I accepted her apology. I told her I hoped her knee was healing well. I told her I'd send the list of home care services if she wanted. And I told her something I wish someone had told her a long time ago, that a family isn't a kingdom, that love isn't labor, that the people who hold everything together deserve to be seen and valued, not used and discarded when someone decides they're no longer necessary. I don't know if she understood. Maybe she did. Maybe she didn't. Maybe understanding isn't the point. Maybe the point is just saying it, putting the truth into the world and letting it land wherever it lands. Last week, I closed on my first investment property. A little duplex with good bones and terrible carpet and a yard that needs everything. I'm going to renovate it myself. Not all of it. I'm not insane, but the parts I can learn. The painting, the landscaping, the small repairs that YouTube can teach you if you're patient and willing to make mistakes. Lily helped me move boxes in on Saturday. She's 12 now and she asked me why I wanted to buy a building that needed so much work. I told her that sometimes the things that need the most work become the things you're most proud of. She thought about that for a second and said, "Like you, Mom?" And I laughed so hard I had to put down the box I was carrying. Yeah, baby, exactly like me. I'm not angry at the Harris family anymore. I'm not grateful to them either. I'm something better than both of those things. I'm free of them, free of the need for their approval, their acceptance, their acknowledgement, free of the exhausting, soul-crushing performance of being indispensable to people who would rather throw a party when you leave than say thank you while you're standing right in front of them. They celebrated my divorce with a sheet cake and champagne. 6 months later, they came back, one by one, standing in the ruins of the life I used to maintain for them, asking me to rebuild what they'd never learned to build themselves, and I said no, not with anger, not with revenge, just with the calm, clear understanding that my hands were no longer available for someone else's foundation. My hands were busy now, building my own. If you're watching this and you're the person in your family who holds everything together and nobody notices, I want you to hear something. Your absence will be louder than your presence ever was. Not because you're replaceable and they'll move on. Because you are replaceable and they will feel it in every single thing that stops working the moment you walk out the door. You don't have to wait for them to figure that out. You already know what you're worth. Now go build something that proves it. Thank you for watching. If this story hit close to home, subscribe and drop a comment telling me about a time someone didn't realize what they had until you were gone. I read every single one. Your story matters. I'll see you next time.